So you're also quite an entrepreneur and storyteller, and believe in the power of stories to really be catalysts for change. And Amir and I had a conversation, like, I don't know, 2 weeks ago or so, about what he would like, what question he would like to engage with in this forum. And we came up with one and talking about it, and then towards the end of the conversation, something shifted, and Amir said, what I would really like to talk about is that how is activism itself, or what even we're fighting for, going to change with the eruption of disruptive technologies that are really on the horizon. And I think, in Germany, and I think in the US, there's a big talk about this book, Homo Deus, that is kind of covering that turf. And so I thought it'd be an awesome conversation to hear, because you're somebody who really is in this, and it'd be great to hear what you're seeing, what you're concerned with, and talk about that together. And so we'll talk for about an hour, and then we'll bring everyone in for a half an hour, and then they'll go into breakout groups, and we'll move on.
Sounds good.
Okay.
That's good.
Great.
Yeah. So thank you for hosting me. Thank you for having me here. Disruptive technology. I mean, as you said, we were discussing what we would talk about, in this session here together, and we covered a lot of ground. But then at the end of our conversation, I realized, well, wait a second, actually the real subject here is the rise of disruptive technologies, and it's going to be a tsunami of change. And I realized that even though I'm immersed in the conversation with many of these technologists and people who are involved with them, people who are involved with the X Prize Foundation, Peter Diamandis, people who are involved with Singularity University, and so on, the wider public isn't really exposed to what's going on in that sphere and how it's going to change our lives. And so, to really make the point, let's just look at one simple example which has already affected our lives without really us choosing to be part of that per se. We just kind of got swept up and became part of it because of peer pressure in a way, and that's Facebook. Years ago, Facebook was a small thing limited to the Ivy League universities in the United States. And there was this real interest on the outside, like, oh my God, what if I'm not in an Ivy League university? What if I want to be part of Facebook? And you couldn't get into Facebook at the time. So they opened it up gradually, and then people all over the US could become part of it, and then Canada, and then just, all over the world. And now Facebook dominates our lives in many ways, and it dominates politics, and it has influenced and changed our world irrevocably. So the decisions that went into the design of Facebook, and that went into making it addictive, essentially, we were never part of that. We were never part of that discussion. But regardless, the technology has impacted us. And now, out of necessity, I need to be on Facebook. Believe me, if I had a choice, I wouldn't even be on Facebook anymore. But the entrepreneur in me needs to be honest and admit the fact that when it comes to Facebook's advertising platform, my goodness, it is powerful. You can literally reach any audience in a matter of minutes. And you can be talking to potential customers all around the world in a matter of days from launching your ads. So the possibilities for e-commerce and doing business globally, it's a miracle in many ways. So it has a lot of powerful benefits for the economy and so on. But many of its other features, we don't really have a say. Now that's just Facebook. Well, what happens when artificial intelligence hits the mainstream? When virtual reality hits the mainstream? When the ability to grow, human embryos in artificial wombs becomes reality? Bitcoin It's coming. It's going to be reality. And so just with all of these discoveries and advancements and, you know, being engaged in these conversations with my friends who are really in the discourse and who are part of it and who themselves in many ways are technologists. I wouldn't really consider myself a technologist per se, but I'm very tech savvy and I'm aware of what's going on. I had to take a step back because one of my biggest passions for many years has been promoting classical liberalism and human rights, right? As not just an idea, but as something that we all need to affirm and practice for our own sake globally. Mm. Now, if you think about it, the Catholic Church has been debating, you know, contraception and so on and condoms for decades. It seems like such a hilarious, cute, petty discussion now when you put it in perspective, right, with artificial wombs coming into reality pretty soon. I mean, what's that going to do to Catholic doctrine? What's that going to do to Islamic doctrine? Let's take things like cloning and human bioengineering. Many of these, you know, many of the controversial practices within that field are currently outlawed in the United States. And for good reason, in some cases, one perhaps could say in many cases. In South Korea, that's not the case. Mm-hmm. In China, that's not the case. The Chinese government is already experimenting with, you know, tampering with human genomes so that they could pretty much breed a new generation of Chinese babies who have you know, skills and abilities that are higher than the global average. So this is all going on and we're not part of that conversation. And the reason this has a lot of resonance for me is because it reminds me of what my dad used to tell me growing up. Now, my dad is a retired professor of folklore and oral traditions. Mm. And, you know, we love having intellectual discussions with each other. In many ways, I feel like I'm walking in his footsteps. And, you know, he would talk about the old days when modernity came crashing into Sudan through colonialism, British colonialism, and how modernity disrupted societal ways of being, you know, ways of thinking, norms, and values, and how they at the time, you know, being the elite, essentially, in the University of Khartoum, had to figure out ways of preserving the culture and creating ways to guide society through this transition, so that they can maintain their sense of identity and heritage while also embracing the best of modernity. Now, the problem is it was in response to something that they didn't have control over, which is modernity coming crashing into the whole region because of colonialism and the birth of the nation state and so on. Mm-hmm. So that happened in a paradigm where, you know, there were the colonial powers and the countries that got colonized, essentially. Now, that doesn't necessarily exist anymore, really. Definitely not like it did in the old days. Now we have Silicon Valley. Now we have global commerce. We have global capitalism. And all of those things are driven by, you know, the thirst and hunger for more profits. But in a lot of ways, we're also complicit because consumerism is what drives that. And we all want the latest technology and we want a better phone and, you know, we want a better Zoom system that doesn't get stuck and, you know, puts us back on mute, right? So it's all intertwined. And if you put all of this together, talking about classical liberalism and human rights, I mean, how is that relevant if we're not factoring all these changes? So notions of privacy are changing. Well, what will be our new notions of privacy? And how much of the things that we have right now or had that we valued and continue to value, how much of those things can we preserve and bring forward into this new paradigm that's emerging? And so the values of liberalism and democracy and human rights absolutely have to be part of the discourse moving forward, but we can talk about them in the way that we have lived them and experienced them in the past. We need to come up with innovative ways to ensure that these values continue on with us in this crazy new world that's really coming fast and emerging.
Amir, if I may come in with a question here, because I think one of the difficulties of what you're talking about, and I experience it right now as we're talking, that is so hard to imagine what is coming. Mm-hmm. For example, you are, in some words, just telling the Facebook story. Only 3 years ago, no one, at least I had no clue what impact this technology could have on our democratic institutions as it has right now. It's just, it was out of my imagination. I heard some of the technology that you are describing right now, but it's part of the difficulty I see myself confronted from. It's beyond my capacity to imagine what it means. And I guess that's part of the problem that you are addressing. Mm-hmm. So I would ask you, as someone who at least is starting to think into this and listening to people think this, to kind of imagine what are the implications of all of that is beyond just some naming of some problems. But do you have some sense? I mean, of course, in the end, it's not possible. In the end, we don't know what's really coming. It's too complex for our human mind to really imagine what it will be. That's part of the problem we are talking about. But in order to be as much as we can on the ball of this, we have to find a way to really start thinking about it and having to imagine these are not just names that are coming. It's a whole new reality that's coming. That's in the end implicating what it means to be a human being, mm-hmm. and also implicating what are human rights, what is democracy, in a completely reversed reality to some degree. So I would like to ask you, are there some, and also because I know you're very much focusing on the power of storytelling. I think also in this, we have to tell the story of what's coming in order to allow us to imagine to the degree that's possible, or how you see possible, to get some grasp. What is it? What are you talking about?
Right. Now that's a great question, and it now helps us, have a conversation which is more actionable in nature, so we can have some takeaways. So, as you said, all the stuff that I just explained, and this is just part of it. I was really confronted with that back in 2014, 2015. That's when the realization really hit me. And that's when I had to take a step back and ask myself, do I want to keep writing articles and, appearing on media and doing book tours and basically continuing to be an activist in the way that I was? And I was doubtful. And now, a couple of years later, I realized that it was a good decision for me to shift my efforts in another direction. And so here's what I recommend moving forward for everyone on the call. I think we're going to have to be less invested in the things that we hold, near and dear to our hearts, that we've been very used to as our methods of envisioning a better world and helping bring it into, realization. And we have to start putting more time and energy, investing into creating an investment basically in a more futuristic approach. And here's what I mean by that. So let's say if you're a biologist. Well, if you're a biologist, you can be looking at things as they are right now, more or less. Or you can try to envision in your own field where you have your own expertise, what things will look like 10 years from now. And so that means becoming invested in that futuristic conversation. That means, subscribing to newsletters and media that talk about all these inventions that are coming online right now. The X Prize Foundation is a great place to start. They're always releasing updates about new kinds of nanotechnology, 3D printing, bioprinting specifically, and so on. So that already starts to give us an idea of, my goodness, in 10 years from now, here is what roughly things could look like. Now, that's how they could look like roughly in 10 years or so from a technological standpoint. But what are they going to look like morally? Mm-hmm. That conversation isn't happening enough within the technological discourse. And there's a name for that discourse. It's called transhumanism. Mm-hmm. And many of you might be familiar with that term. So in the transhumanist movement, there's not just an acknowledgement, but almost it's like a celebration, and the statement is this: human flesh is messy. Like to hell with human flesh. Who cares about our flesh and bones and skin? That's just lame. You know, it's messy, it gets damaged. What if we could turn ourselves into cyborgs? What if we could evolve our bodies into something else? But it doesn't take the interiority of human experience, the spiritual dimension of human experience into account, because it's based on this view, you know, of flatland scientism. You know, we could just go ahead and call it that. So for those of us who care about, you know, spirituality and who see a role for metaphysics moving forward, we have to go and basically intervene and interject and say, listen, even though you guys are developing these technologies, they're going to impact all of us. Therefore, I have a say in how this moves forward. Instead of us being in the mainstream, concerned with our...
Ooh.
Let's see if we can...
And continue coming up with this crazy technological advancements that are acting on us. So we need to step into the discourse and have a say and try to, you know, predict 10 years from now, how are things going to look from a technological standpoint.
Hopefully 10 years from now, Zoom won't work, won't be, you're breaking up a bit. Whoops. There you are.
Okay, we're back.
You need to unmute, I guess.
Can you hear us? Amir, you can hear us?
Yes, now we're good.
So we have some instability on the net on this side, so excuse us.
Yeah.
But we heard you.
We're not in our usual spot in Frankfurt. Mm-hmm.
You know, so I'm just going to add, you know, briefly, like, what does this look like specifically in my case? So in my case, I'm trying to project myself 10 years into the future, and I'm trying to imagine what the media landscape looks like. That's number one. What will the media landscape look like? And number two, also, what will our stories and narratives look like? And I'm positioning myself in this discourse as a researcher, as somebody who's inquisitive, and as somebody who wants to be part of, you know, co-creating the solutions. I'm positioning myself in a discourse that involves a lot of people with mixed heritage. You know, so if you take some statistics, right now in the United States, 15% of marriages are mixed marriages, you know, interracial marriages, or, you know, marriages that involve different religions. And these numbers are going up. And so in a few years, it's expected to hit 20%. Same thing in Canada. So in Metro Vancouver, it's about 15%. Mixed marriages is going to hit 20%. Eventually, it's going to be 25% mixed marriages. I mean, that's kind of unheard of in our modern-ish world. So what opportunities then arise? Well, a lot of opportunities arise, because if 25% of marriages are going to be mixed, and we're going to have a generation of beige babies, essentially, then what does that do to identity politics? What does that do to undermine, you know, our sectarian tendencies, our tribalistic tendencies? How can we harness that so we can bring about a more universal definition of what it means to be human, whereby we can celebrate our backgrounds, we can celebrate, you know, our cultural traditions, but we don't have to hold on and cling on to them in this egotistical way where it becomes an us versus them, you know, tribal conflict. So that's something that I see happening, and that's specifically what I'm focused on. And I see things moving in that direction in 10 years from now. You know, like that's the projection, right, that I'm making. So I'm doing what I can now so that 10 years from now, I can have a say in how that evolves moving forward. You know, I want to be part of that conversation, and I don't want to be left behind. So I believe that we all need to figure out, what is our vantage point based on our expertise and our backgrounds, and how can we position ourselves to be part of these, emerging discourses, so that whatever disruptions are coming, we can shape them so they can go in a direction that is more conducive to our well-being.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I think one of the questions that it raises for me, and is related to something that you said at the beginning, which is we didn't have a say in that.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have a say in how Facebook would emerge, what it would do. In politics, we didn't have a say in, our big political conversations actually happening on social media, not through established channels. They didn't have a say in that either. So I guess there are a couple of things that have, so holding that, and then there are a couple of things that I've heard about what's coming that pop to mind that I think are very interesting and scary. One is I read something about, people are now talking there's a lot of talk about robotics and about the combination of robotics and AI, and how that together is going to create a context in which most people, particularly the people who are struggling to have jobs now, are really just not going to have any. There isn't going to be paying work that will allow them to support a life that that's going to be viable. And I know, like with like books by Jaron Lanier, where he's talked about people earning an income by selling their data, selling who they are. Although the United States now just made a ruling, or they're trying to pass a law that says that your data doesn't belong to you; it belongs to the carrier. But it's like that we're going to be. And then I remember another tech guy saying, "Wow, with all this stuff coming down the pike, what are we going to do with human beings?
Mm-hmm.
What are we going to do with them? How do we're going to need to have a context in, some way that we're providing ongoing entertainment for human beings through probably stories and narratives that come from the past and are familiar, that allow human beings to live in a fantasy world of something while something else is going on, actually, and I think it's like this. And again, no one has asked us. So where and how do we create forums in which we can have this conversation and up-level the volume of this conversation, the involvement of people in this conversation, so that we do have a say, or that there's ways to put pressure on here, because these kinds of pressures coming from the tech world are pressures that are disruptive to government. I mean, the nation process is actually ends up being subordinate to these tech giants. So what does we then each become who rules us? What rules human life then?
That's the thing. In the old days, everything was subjugated to under the nation state, right? Everything was subservient to the administrative tools and systems of the nation state. But now the nation state in a way has been co-opted. The nation state, can no longer function as an administration, in society, because in many ways, Facebook is the de facto ruler. Google is the de facto power. Even nation states need to rely on them. Even politicians to communicate with one another, to run for elections, need to rely on them. And these are companies that are all based in the United States, in Silicon Valley. And it's not to, attribute, evil intentions to them or anything like that, but they have major blind spots. They're linear thinkers in many ways. They think in terms of, information and technology, and it's a worldview that's based on flatland scientism. Now, the good news is that a lot of that is changing in Silicon Valley, because of festivals like Burning Man. The conversations that were happening in Silicon Valley, say 8 years ago, around mindfulness and meditation, people would just give you a weird look, like you were just a weirdo if you talked about that. Now, they've hit the mainstream of Silicon Valley. So the new generation of Silicon Valley programmers and engineers who are entering these companies, they're already starting to put pressure on their leaderships to take into account, how their tools and products are disrupting society, and in many ways, negatively. So that's the good news. But I think we, as the general public, need to be more involved in that as well, and foresee that we could be working on something right now that we've been working on for a few years that we're really passionate about, but unless we take it and we pivot to ensure that when the tsunami wave comes crashing, we can ride it gracefully and also be part of the conversation, the solution. I think that's important. And I know it's very big picture stuff, but each and every one of us, we've got to figure out what's the right answer, given our own inclinations and what we're passionate about.
No, I understand. May I take a slightly dystopian position here? Mm-hmm. Because I very much appreciate what you're saying. And just to tell you, we are here at the Baltic Sea in Germany, next to the Polish border, where we all have a small conference, and we talked about the very thing, also the power of algorithm and the tsunami of algorithm coming here in the small conference that we are having, and you are broadcasted here also to the audience. Isn't it too late? Isn't basically can't you make the rational argument that algorithm is exploding in a way that human consideration is just too slow for this? And what is the argument to say no? This is not the case. This is the first question I have. It's just a real question. Is there something where we can say, yes, there is this explosion, this tsunami of algorithm, in which way ever, if Facebook, Google, whatever you see, and what is coming here, is there something where we can say, no, there is an intervention point that maybe can bring a human face to what's going on? Let's put it this way. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then the second question is related to what we say, tech guys, and again, not to put them down, I don't want to kind of demonize them anyway, but as you're saying, the likelihood is higher that they have a scientific flatland way of looking at this, just because of the very reason that they are not focusing on how you will call it, consciousness question. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. So it's likely that they don't see the deeper human problems coming here in the same way like people who are maybe more focusing on that part of reality are doing. So if there's a chance to intervene, on what line would people who are more aware of human values, of human identity, and of human consciousness, not to say spiritual depth, on what line would this intervention, or should this intervention come, and how do you see that there is maybe some positive creative friction that allows something that is not as dystopian as you very easily can up with and say, basically it's too late. The machines, the cyborgs are coming, and human are kind of an old-fashioned model of evolution.
Yeah. So I'm going to pretend to be smart enough to answer that question.
Yeah.
The first one, I could just answer very generally. So one of my colleagues, her name is Zeynep Tawfik. She's originally from Turkey. She's based in the United States. She actually gave a TED Talk recently on this very subject about algorithms, about the need to humanize those algorithms, about the need to ensure that morals and values are part of the algorithms themselves. And in many ways, those algorithms are going to be imperfect, especially if you introduce the notion of morals and values, because that's complicated, which is why she suggests that you can't just have algorithms running on their own doing their thing, because it's like this big black box. And you don't know what's going on in the black box. And for her, that's the most terrifying thing, is that these algorithms, as they become more advanced and based on artificial intelligence and machine learning, they're going to learn stuff on their own, and they're going to get smarter in their own ways, and they're going to make decisions on our behalf to freaking manage, society. And so she introduces the simple question of, okay, you have a self-driving autonomous vehicle. And, a situation arises on the road where if the vehicle goes right, it's going to kill 2 people. But if it goes left, it's going to kill, one person. Okay, well, is that one person an elderly person? Is it a child? Are the 2 people elderly? And this, I mean, you can factor so many different things, ethically speaking, but how is an algorithm supposed to decide about that? And, how are we supposed to program it to make such decisions? So, of course, morals and values, just based on that, taken into account. That whole classic trolley problem. It's now very real, and we're confronted by it. So these questions are already arising, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence, in automobiles, and how a car should react in such a situation. But she's absolutely right, and her core point is the algorithms cannot be in a black box where we don't know what's going on inside. We have to keep it open, and we must introduce values and morals into these systems and continue to oversee them and provide human oversight. Without human oversight, I mean, it's a scary scenario. So she's doing that, on the TED stage, and she's part of the TED community. And what I can tell you is, based on the people, that I speak to who are very involved with TED, is because of what happened recently, with the election of Donald Trump, and just seeing the disruptions that are happening also within Europe in terms of information warfare, the TED leadership is realizing, wait a second, we've been one of the ones promoting this rosy view of technology, and yay, high five, we're moving forward, look at all this technological progress. Now they're pivoting. Now they realize that they have a major role to play in shaping this emerging scene, and ensuring that the right kind of politics, the right kind of values are included in the discussion, which of course raises the question, well, what is, the right set of values? Well, what is the right set of morals? We come back to age-old philosophical questions. And what's interesting is that those questions are no longer, a seeming luxury. Like, it's kind of a luxury to sit down and pontificate about the big questions of, human existence. Well, no, it's no longer a luxury. It's an absolute imperative right now, and it needs to happen. So that's kind of like the first, answering the first question, that there is hope and there is stuff being done. If it's, adequate, I have no idea. I'm not by no means an expert on that field. And then the second question that you asked, if you could just remind me, touch on it again. What was it?
On which line, if you say
intervention,
that if the people who are more aware of the consequences that you're describing are more aware of the human and consciousness dimension that is in danger, on what line should that intervention come, and what should it be about? Yeah,
so that's a great question. If I may, I'm just going to modify it a little bit to include, other insights into the answer. I think we have 2 problems here. One is to continue propagating the importance of human rights and liberal democracy, right? So that people, more and more people, can continue to buy into the idea and understand why it's so important for our well-being, all of us. So we have to continue propagating that. And that's what I was very focused on for a long time. But I think there's a second issue, and it's arising recently. And it's, how can we consolidate and maintain the cultural progress that has already happened over the past few decades, starting in the 60s until now? Because my big worry is, if we're just focused on propagating, then that's not enough. Because now with information warfare, there's a real effort underway to undermine all the gains and the wins that we've had over the past few decades. So, propagating the ideas to new groups of people, yes, that's great, but I'm realizing that that's actually kind of secondary, because if we're not defending and consolidating the wins, then it's a real loss. It's useless. And so how do we defend those wins? Well, I think as citizens, we have a role to play in pressuring governments to pressure Facebook to ensure that we, yes, should continue to live in an open society. Yes, we should continue to live in an open world, but we need to have real measures where we can identify fake news, where we can identify propaganda, okay? And there's specifically a very dangerous feature that can be, terribly misused on Facebook. Now, for advertising and marketing, generally speaking, it's great. And it's called a Facebook dark post. And so a dark post is a post that doesn't show up on a Facebook page, right? So typically you publish something, it appears there, everyone can see it, everyone can comment on it, everybody that goes to that Facebook page. A dark post, on the other hand, is basically a promoted post that only appears temporarily and for the people that you're targeting through Facebook's algorithm and data selection. So I can literally, for instance, I can right now, me, just as one individual, literally one person, and I can have a $10,000 budget set on the side. I can go into Facebook and I can choose under geographic locations. I can choose a small town in East Germany where anti-refugee sentiments are quite high compared to the rest of Germany. And I can geo-target that specific town only. Next, I can now target the people in that town who read right-wing publications and who follow specific right-wing media outlets, right? So now what am I doing? I'm targeting a specific number of people there who could sway the election one way or another, and all I need is $10,000 and an ability to just be completely shameless and to lie, and instigate a lot of anger and hatred through BS stories. So now I'm targeting that small town, specifically people who are right-leaning, who read right-wing news, and I can come up with a story about how, a German woman on the street was sexually harassed and molested and so on, and how it was done by refugees, and how the media is not reporting on it in Germany, and how we all need to do something. And I can spend $10,000 and promote the hell out of it and make it go viral, right? When people share it. And then the dark post disappears from the page and it's no longer showing. So right now, as we speak, there are millions, maybe even billions, who knows, of Facebook dark posts that are out there that are promoting different ideas and products and services, and that can be abused to just promote blatant political lies and to have such laser targeting that you genuinely can now sway elections. I am not a German citizen. I'm not an EU citizen. Guess what? I can participate in the process, okay, of elections in Germany, and I can actually help sway the elections one side or another, and I can make a political party lose, and I can do it as an individual all the way here in Vancouver, Canada, with $10,000. I just have to be really, really smart about what is the best town to target based on the polls. If maybe the votes go up by 5%, it swings the other way. And so that's what a lot of companies now that use our data, that use Facebook advertising are doing. And it's part of the reason Donald Trump won.
Yeah, definitely. And actually there's the Oxford, or is it the Cambridge? There's a big data company in the UK that is actually specializing in absolutely identifying down to the toothpaste that people use who those potential people are. Now, the thing is, I mean, that to me is all. This to me feels like I think that this is the world we're in already. What's to come? I still don't feel I have a, and I don't know that we can have a real sense of, other than right now. If you extrapolate, right now we're at a point where decisions are being made, as you keep saying, and we are not being, we in any representative form are not being consulted in this, and there is no context, governmental or regulatory context that holds any of these enterprises. And maybe I mean, that's one of the first thing I heard, that apparently the German government may have passed a law, or is considering passing a law, with very stiff fines if Facebook publishes anything that is reported to it as false, and allows it to stay on its platform. But it's like, but that's Germany, and how do these things don't have boundaries any longer. I guess the question that I still have, and maybe that's the question that we can take into our open forum, is what are the ideas for how do we create accountability here? How do we bring these different dimensions of the discourse that Thomas raised into, to have an impact, rather than finding ourselves in 5 years in a situation where we're milked for our data, and our sense of what privacy is not recognizable, because we've been it's all been given away already.
Okay, and for that maybe we do open the forum. So I would like to ask everyone to open your camera. And if you cannot open your camera because we have switched you off, please send us a note. Then we will do it from our side.
Right. Anyway, more folks.
Right.
So if you have troubles turning on your camera, please in the chat give us a note, and we will switch off your camera from our side. And otherwise, maybe Amir, you wanna go into the question Elizabeth raised, and then we see how what other questions may come here.
Mm-hmm.
Good to see everyone, by the way.
Yeah.
All right. Oh.
Peter.
So should people start raising their hands digitally or something, and then?
Great.
Yeah, well, if you want to why don't you answer the sort of follow along from what I was asking, and then let's get, it'll take us a little bit to get everybody on screen.
Yeah, I mean, for once again, my own personal answer is based on my own vantage point and what I can do based on my skill sets and what I'm passionate about. And so it's a very big conversation, and no single person can take it on and figure out the answers. But I think if we take this big problem and we dissect it into smaller problems, we can take on the small problems in a feasible, realistic way. So for me, I look at it from the perspective of media and the discourse surrounding identity politics. How can those two things change for the better? To me, that's my passion. That's where I know I can play a really important role over the next decades. But as biologists, as lawyers, people who specialize in taxes and accounting, as bankers, there's so many niche areas where all of this stuff is going to be impacted, and where we should have a say when it comes to the moral and ethical issues. Like these conversations are no longer just, you know, things that we have in a classroom in the university when we were doing our bachelor's or master's. I mean, these are very real questions right now, because our world is being so badly disrupted that the way it was built, based on the foundations of values and morals that, you know, there was a consensus over, that's being eroded. And so we need to consolidate as much as we can and defend that and maintain it. And at the same time, be part of the conversation and stand against those who want to undermine it. And I think one of the best ways to do that is actually by talking with the people we most disagree with and meeting them in real life, to diffuse the mistrust, to diffuse the tension, because so many social studies are now showing that we're all living in silos. You know, in the old days, you know, in Congress, Republican congressmen and Democrats, that they would go to barbecues together. Their kids, you know, would attend the same school and hang out with each other and be friends with each other. You know, even if, you know, mommy or daddy are on different sides of the political aisle. But right now, studies have shown that even the way the elected members of the United States live their lives, they live separate from one another to a great degree. You know, their kids don't necessarily go to the same school anymore. They don't necessarily live in the same neighborhoods anymore. And so that's true for all of us to a large degree. And so, you know, what I've done to tackle that head on is I decided to get out of my Vancouver bubble, which is very left-leaning, very progressive. And, you know, to my shock, initially, I went to this conference where I found Canadian Trump supporters wearing "Make America Great Again" red hats. And it was a shock. And this is here in Vancouver. And here's the interesting part. They're young millennials. Young millennials, Canadians, who are passionate Trump supporters. So it was a bit of a shock to walk into, you know, the setting and find that about a third were wearing the hats to be provocative. But I decided, you know what, let me just talk to them. So I went, you know, around shaking hands. Hey, how's it going? I'm just curious. Like, what's your take on what's happening? I just want to learn. You know, and I went there with no preconceived notions, as much as humanly possible. And it was a fascinating learning experience. And I found that they have many legitimate grievances and concerns, even if I don't agree with their ultimate decision. And so, you know, nothing can replace that. You know, online conversations can never replace that, right? So we all have to do that at the end of the day. Now, it might seem unfair, like, why the hell should it be on me to go out there to them? Why don't they come and talk to me? True. But I don't have that luxury, especially as someone who's a minority and who feels the pressure growing. I mean, the travel ban affected me and my parents very directly. So, you know, there's a lot at stake. But there's stuff, of course, where I don't have an answer. You know, I have the question, and I think the nature of the question can determine the answer. And one of the big questions really for us is, what's sovereignty in a world where I can run an advertising campaign for political purposes to influence elections in Germany from the comfort of my own home here in Canada? Yeah, you're on mute, by the way, Elizabeth.
I'm going to turn myself back on. Yeah, right. That anybody, anywhere. I mean, this is sort of the Russian hacking thing, or whatever. Anybody, or the two teenagers in Latvia. Where was it?
Mm-hmm. Macedonia, I believe. Macedonia.
Okay. Yeah. Who created fake news websites and you know, made a lot of money, but they just came up with weird stories.
Yeah.
I don't know if people want to jump in with questions or thoughts, but I also would like to kind of shift or have us think about how do we. Let me back up a little bit. One of the things that I found so powerful about your story, and it made me think about my own biography, Amir, was that it was science fiction that really helped you just to imagine different worlds. and growing up in a context in which your education was extremely fundamentalist, and as every child, basically every child, unless there's something really wrong, wants to be good in the context that they're in. And if the context that you're in says, these people are evil and this is how you think about life and so on and so forth, you try to do that because that's what it means to be a part of what it means to be a kid. But that science fiction stories that had powerful, that showed different ways of living, showed different possibilities, were an anchor for you to be able to say, well, why are you saying that the world has to be this way? Like I've read the book that shows that it could be a different way. I've read a lot of books, or I've seen a lot of movies that show different things. And I'm wondering about, how do we talk about the narrative that we're in? How do we reinvent the narrative that we're in? Most of us are really stuck in early modern narratives that are, Thomas just went to take care of the conference that is in one of the pictures. I guess that
I'm back.
Okay, you're back. Okay. But how do we, most of us are stuck either in a kind of very small hero story or a romance narrative about finding true love and so forth, that the stories that we're telling belong to probably, I don't know, the early 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
How do we create new narratives about what is the purpose of human life in the face of what it is that's happening now? How do we get those kinds of stories that have guts and values and so forth? How do they become part of what we share? How do they become part of what we do seek as entertainment? Right now, all we get is corruption. I mean, most television programs that are successful right now are about violence, sexuality, and utter corruption of anybody in authority. How do we create? How do we develop a narrative around this that would be that brings us to a different outcome?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So there are a number of ways to go about it. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. If you look at many of the movies that have done really well over the past few years, even novels, they're pretty much post-apocalyptic. Just there's so much popularity in that genre.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's reflective of what we've all been through since the 2008, financial crash and economic crisis. And for my generation as millennials, we grew up with, you can be anything you want to be, high five, yay, we're going to save the world. We grew up watching Captain Planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so much idealism. And then we graduate out of university. Jobs are more difficult to get than are in our parents' generation.
You're in debt up to your eyeballs.
Yeah.
You're in severe debt. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in my case, I was fortunate because, I went to university in Malaysia. And so it wasn't too bad. But when I talk to many of my American friends, I'm horrified that they're in their late 20s and some of them are in over $100,000 worth of debt.
Right.
Each. It's insane. So it's just like, what are the possibilities for someone's individual life? And if the possibilities are kind of pessimistic and jaded and disappointed, then that's already a bit post-apocalyptic, at an individual level. And so I think there is something there for the cultural resonance of such narratives. That said, we definitely do have to shift. And so, talking with fellow storytellers, I think it's important not to just tell cautionary tales, but to also tell a story of what's possible, the promised land that we can all, arrive at, while including a cautionary tale. So it's no longer, hey, this is a post-apocalyptic narrative and it's all doom and gloom. And at the same time, it's not this the romantic, you know, yay, and they lived happily ever after. So, you know, we have to be able to merge both and say, you know, we've come a long way and we've accomplished so much. And the truth is, we have yet to accomplish even more. And it's going to be really exciting, you know, if we can get there. And we are on track to get there if we stop some of the bad things from happening. And so, you know, there's momentum. We've done a lot of good. It's great. Let's celebrate, high five. It already puts you in a positive state. It already tells a story based on, you know, the history that we've gone through, right? From a perspective of deep time eyes, the evolution of the universe, the creative impulse, where we're at, and where it could all go. But it's not by default. You know, we need to co-create that future, and we have to be very careful about certain things. And so those kinds of stories, what they do is they give us a boost of confidence. They give us some inspiration to let us know, you know, where we came from and who we are and, you know, what it is to be in this moment. And it also gives a great sense of possibility, but it doesn't leave that great sense of possibility in the hands of other people and, you know, turn me into a spectator. It actually demands that we all become part of the greater solution. So those narratives are great because it doesn't paint the future as this stark, difficult thing and this big mountain to climb. And, oh my God, how can I take on this big, large problem? Right? So the truth is, all of these terrible negative things are happening, but we've come a long ways in human species. If you read books by, you know, Steven Pinker, especially his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, I mean, he has so many studies in there. It's all based on evidence that we're becoming less violent, less nasty towards each other. And that's great news. Right now, we're going through a disruption. And we shouldn't just say, oh, it's just a temporary thing. Well, again, there are no guarantees. So we need to be very vigilant moving forward. So that's one kind of narrative. The other kind of narrative, and this is the one that I'm more interested in just based on my background experience, is, you know, well, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to have an ethnic identity? What does it mean to have a cultural identity? And that's a trickier terrain, but I think it's one that we definitely need to deal with, especially when it comes to the paradigm of the oppressor and the oppressed. You know, it's very binary. And I'm not so sure if it's relevant in our world anymore. Now, the problem with transitioning away from such narratives is that for those who have been wronged, for those who have been put in severe trauma, you know, through colonialism or acts of genocide or whatever, there's a real investment in the narrative of what happened to us. You know, this happened to us and it cannot happen again, and we must fight against it. And the investment gets deeper and strengthens and continues when there is more trauma. So if you look at, let's say, you know, African Americans in the United States, police shootings, all kinds of nasty stuff happening that we're now seeing more than ever on our smartphones. That just deepens the wound, and it makes it difficult to come out of that narrative of the oppressed, the victim. Now, there's truth to it, but I also think there's a lot of truth to, you know, a different side of the narrative, which is perseverance and resilience and the ability to produce art and culture and jazz and blues and just great, you know, beautiful human expression, despite such horrible, terrible circumstances that happened in the past. And I don't think that happens enough in our political discourse. And so there is this imbalance where, you know, minority communities who've historically been oppressed, in the political sphere, I think the politicians play a role in stirring up the victimhood identity and using it as part of identity politics to mobilize votes. And I think moving forward, we need a bigger narrative. And so what does it mean to be American as we step into this future together, you know, given the changing demographics in the United States? What does it mean to be Canadian? You know, I asked myself this question as somebody who arrived in Canada recently, 3 years ago. And so the old labels. I just don't believe that they apply anymore. You know, our vocabulary from the 60s of black and white and colored and people of color, it's kind of moot in many ways, because you could have somebody like Will Smith, who is fabulously rich, famous, and very well-to-do, and you can have somebody who's white in a small town who just got laid off from a factory and who's broke and who's now doing drugs to cope with the pain of the loss. So we have very different stark contrasts compared to what was going on in the 60s and the 50s. And again, that's not to say that there is no injustice and that there is no, you know, racism and so on. Yes, all of those things are there, but there have been, you know, a lot of advancements and much progress has happened. So what does it mean to be American in this crazy emerging moment that we're in right now? And for me personally, that's where storytelling, I think, has a very important role to play. And that's why I'm coming at it from the perspective of hyphenated identities and people of mixed background, because, you know, it's innate to me to be someone who wants to mediate. I can't help but want to mediate. I have no other options. You know, I'm mixed. I'm African and I'm Arab. I was born in Northern Sudan and I grew up in Qatar, and I went to an American school in Malaysia, hence the accent. Mm-hmm. You know, I have gay friends and I have, you know, unfortunately homophobic friends, and I try to talk some sense into their heads. You know, and so I'm always playing that role because I can't help it. It's my predicament. And it's the predicament of many, many people who come from a mixed background, which is why I think it's going to come, you know, it's going to fall upon people like us to break the impasse. Because right now, say if you're just white or just black, it's already a binary situation. You know, I step into the situation, now I'm disrupting the conversation and I'm disrupting the typical binary. And that can upset a lot of people, which it has in the past. But I think it's exactly what's necessary moving forward.
Great, Amir. I would like to make some space for some questions from the people here on the call. And if you have a question or something you want to bring, just raise your hand. You can also unmute your microphone on your own. And if you have difficulties, let us know, then we can unmute you. But otherwise, just come in, and I'm sure Amir is happy to respond to you.
Go ahead, Lloyd.
Lloyd and...
Well, I'm sitting here looking at a Martin Luther King quote from 50 years ago. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. Mm-hmm. And so I think that talking about the technologies is important, but the base issues have not changed in 50 years. And I think it's because the materialism because the activism of the last 50 years has focused on materialistic change rather than on consciousness. And one of the things that concerns me most now is by the resistance that's going on by the left in the US to Trump, is that I don't see materialistic liberalism as being a viable path forward. And they're saying that it is. So I just invite your comments on the things that I've just brought up here. One other thing I'd like to say too is, you know, you talked about the flatland of scientism, and you mentioned things like the mindfulness that's been brought in, started in, actually it didn't start, but is most prominently known in Silicon Valley. And they separated in mindfulness, they took the psychological insights of Buddhism and separated it from the broader moral basis of Buddhism, so that mindfulness became a way to give people a mental edge to grab what they want.
Exactly. More productivity, more focus at work, which completely strips it of its, you know, its profound point and purpose. And that's also what I was referring to earlier, is that the younger generation of engineers entering into those companies, based on my conversations with them, you know, just reading into the scene, that's changing, because when you go and, you know, you're in Peru or in Ecuador or wherever, and you end up doing an ayahuasca retreat with a shaman who comes from a lineage of spiritual masters, it becomes very difficult to separate the spiritual aspects and the metaphysical aspects and, just make it all about focus and productivity. Mm-hmm. So that's where the disruption is going on and happening. And Burning Man, that everything that happens in that scene, it's really permeating the new generation in a different way. And as you said, there is also a shift from being so focused on the materialistic aspects to values, the domain of values and the subjective and the intangible. And I think in many ways, because it's for us, we grew up with so much technology, smartphones, computers, access to material abundance. The definition of poverty now for our generation is, we could still have an iPhone, have an Xbox, and maybe we'll just be eating out in McDonald's every day because we can't afford to buy organic food. So it's a different kind of poverty in many cases. And it leaves the question of, is this really it? Is this my life? Sitting here playing Xbox, having my phone, eating junk foods, hanging out with my friends. Is this really it? I don't think that was a very pressing question a few years ago, but it's really shifting. And even the kind of workshops that are happening, the kind of teachers stepping into the scene in the Valley and elsewhere, and even here in Vancouver, it's different. And there's also a bigger environmental awareness. I think that also has really changed. Whereas in the past, the issues to do with the environment were kind of separate, but now it's all starting to converge together. And I think, part of the challenge, but it's also a great opportunity, is because of all these different convergences, we're all, including me, we're all struggling to find a new vocabulary, a new language to talk about the change that's emerging and the change that's necessary. But for the younger generation, I could tell you, just based on my observations, that there's a real yearning and hunger for deeper spirituality and meaning and an acknowledgement of metaphysics. And it's changing, even in the Valley. Wired magazine has done a number of stories about mindfulness and how it increases productivity and efficiency and performance, and they got called out on it. More and more, they're getting called out on it. In the past, no. Now, they're getting called out on it. They're being mocked when they do stuff like that. So the stories coming out are no longer the same, and I think we're all in this weird, strange moment. So that gives me a lot of hope personally, and especially that we're now talking about the environment in a much more prominent way, and also referring to news like what happened, for instance, in India, where India actually conferred rights upon I think it was the Ganges River, that the river itself has rights. Because it's a living being and it's part of an ecosystem and it's not a thing. And that's, it's kind of bittersweet, but it's a very radical notion, and it shouldn't be a very radical notion. That's the thing. So it's very beautiful, and such ideas are no longer considered fringe or radical for members of my generation. And the younger ones, that's actually my next to do. Is I have it on my list, is that this year I want to go to schools here in the city, primary schools, and I want to talk to kids because I want to learn what it is that they're doing and how they see the world. That's the new generation that's emerging, so we should be really investing also a lot in them.
Great. Anyone else want to jump in?
Deborah K., you were nodding your head. Angelo, you were nodding your head. Oh yeah, I'm stalking you guys. I'm clicking here and there we go. So let's see. Oh, Peter. I remember you, Peter.
Yeah.
I stayed with Peter when I was on my German book tour.
And I just want to say you're going to be back in Germany in May.
Yes.
And anybody who wants to see where you're going to be, you can go to your website, amirahmadnasr.com/de. If you want to hook up with Amir when he's here, he's going to be doing some really cool things. Virginia, do you want to jump in? Yeah.
Yes. Listening to the conversation, it seemed to me that a lot of what we're talking about, if I can use integral language, is the upper left quadrant or the interior, which to me implies a personal responsibility and practices, personal practices to be more aware perhaps of morality and values and where we are in relation to others and in relation to the world. So I'm not sure the question I have, but how in dialogue with people in postmodern culture, it's not popular to talk about spirituality and morals and values. So are there ways that we can bring this more often into the conversation? It seems like conversation is part of it, the interior is part of it. So does that speak to you in any way?
Yes, absolutely. And that's a great question. I think we need to align the discourse with the incentives of the person we're talking to. So the way I approach the conversation with entrepreneurs, wherever they may be, who tend to be politically apathetic. I know many entrepreneurs who would say something along the lines of, I don't even read the news. It's just so much negativity and it's so much BS. I don't even keep track of the news anymore. And yeah, I don't care. I'm just building my business and I'm focused on making the world a better place. And I just sit there and listen and I nod my head. And I ask them, okay, well, what are you doing to give back, besides making all this money and selling your products and services? And they're very generous. They write donations, they write checks, they donate very regularly to different causes that they care about. So the question that I bring up is, what is it that allows you in the first place to have this company, to be able to run it, and to be safe in the knowledge that when you wake up tomorrow, your property is not going to be seized and taken away by somebody who's stronger than you or by the government? What gives you the ability to run your company and know that you can keep the fruits of your labor? Like, where does that come from? Or what do you mean? Well, what do you mean? What do you mean? Like, you do realize that in the majority of the world, you can run a company, can become successful, and literally within a matter of days, if there's a corrupt government official who wants to take over your company or wants to get you out of the market, maybe because you're competing with him or her, they can go to a corrupt judge, they can go to corrupt police officers, they can come up with some BS case, and next thing you know, you've got all kinds of lawsuits. Next thing you know, you're in jail and your business is gone, and now you're no longer competition. And the other competitors who have government connections, well, they just sidelined you and bye-bye. You're no more. And it's always interesting and frankly quite shocking to me how that's never taken into consideration so often, but by especially my American friends who are entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. It's just a given. Oh yeah, no, I start a company, I've got my bank account, I've got my lawyers, like, what's the big deal? Like, hello, it is a big deal. You live in a country where you can set up a company, you don't have to pay a bribe, where, thank goodness the judicial system, still has independence, where a court of law can judge matters, like business disputes, and a fair decision can be reached, and you can appeal, and heck, you can take your appeal all the way to the freaking Supreme Court. That just doesn't happen by accident. It does not. That's as a result of the efforts and the works of so many people who've come before us, and it's precisely why we can do what we can do. It's what you can do as an entrepreneur. Oh, wow, I never really thought about it. Yeah, well, that's why values and norms are important. Do you want to live in a democratic society where you can run a business and, you don't have to worry about somebody throwing you in jail just to get rid of you so they can take over your industry? Of course not. Nobody wants that. So yes, values and morals are absolutely part of the equation. Politics is absolutely part of the equation, and it's fundamental. it's fundamental. You know, the way I talk about it is liberty is not an item on the menu, on the table. Liberty is the very table upon which everything else rests. So we really have to care about that. And we have to discuss and know for ourselves what does liberty mean for us as individuals and, you know, us as a society.
Mm-hmm.
Silence.
Yeah. Savannah?
Savannah, you're muted.
Hi. Well, thank you. I agree with all the things you raised. I've long been concerned about many of these issues as well. And these are my thoughts. I would like to somehow galvanize people to do social boycott, boycott socially irresponsible companies. Nobody is stepping forward in creating something like Facebook, where the person has morals and values and ethics. So in effect, it's condoning this because you're allowing yourself to be manipulated and think in the box and not in the circle. And that's my thoughts. I've often thought you raise an very important issue about these people know what they're doing and they can just destroy you and do these lawsuits, like you said. But if all the people go to these socially responsible companies, and there's somebody who started a service to list them in these places, and it's growing, they would either change or go out of business. That's my thoughts anyway. Thank you for listening. It's long been one of my ideas. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Savannah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Deborah, you just made a comment about platform cooperativism. Do you want to talk about that? Or Diana also had a question, but no, you just wanted to make that comment. Okay,
then
great.
Diana.
And actually, that's also a possibility that there will be new technologies that come along that shift the ownership, dynamic. And I know of another one like that, a different kind of Facebook, or where people who create the content keep their content, and there's which is that may be coming down the pike too, which could be a move in a positive direction. But Diana, go ahead.
I was just curious, I did see that Facebook, after the current election, that put some filter or check for like fake news, that it could not be posted. So do you see much hope that some of these systems will self-correct themselves as they see problems arise? I mean, I saw that as quite a positive thing, that they were going to start self-regulating. And so as these difficulties that you just spoke about, so many of them, as they arise or the potential for them arises, how much worth do you give to these industries or whatever self-correcting themselves as a moral, because I do see that as a moral act, an act not for the sake of Facebook, but for the sake of global morality itself.
Yeah, I mean, so there are definitely measures underway to create corrections. There is a major backlash already underway within Facebook. You've got very, very vocal employees within the company who are putting pressure on the leadership to do more and to do it faster. So I do think that the corrections are already happening, are underway. And, I am quite optimistic about them because, even if the leaderships won't admit it publicly, I think privately they realize, oh my goodness, because they're all very left-leaning and liberal anyway, and they were horrified by Trump's election. I mean, Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, was spotted in the San Francisco airport at the protests when people went there to protest, and ensure that refugees come in. And somebody asked him, are you here? What does Google have to say? And he just replied, essentially saying that I'm here in a personal capacity. I'm not here as somebody from Google. And why are you here? Well, because I came from the Soviet Union to the United States as a refugee. My family, we arrived here as refugees. So this is personal. This is very, very personal. That's why I'm here. And he was very visibly upset. So, I think it's important to state that because, there are people at the end of the day and they're doing their best. I don't really believe that they have evil intentions or anything like that. But business interests do weigh heavily, for sure. And we have to ensure that there's a cost to them continuing to do business as usual. So all of that is going on. My main concern, though, is as that is all happening, in the political sphere, if France goes down and Marine Le Pen wins, I don't want to be too dramatic, but it might be game over. It might certainly be game over for the EU. It might certainly be game over for NATO. At the very least, it will essentially be a fifth column in the heart of NATO that is tied to Russian interests, which are authoritarian in nature and have no regard whatsoever for democratic norms and values. So, time is not really something on our side here where we could just take our sweet time and figure out what's going to happen. There's got to be a push of some sort. I'm very encouraged by what Germany's doing. I think given Germany's history, there's a lot more awareness of the consequences and ramifications of such things. So I tend to be more concerned about the political sphere because the way I see it is without liberty, everything else can come crashing, eventually. So I find that to be the underpinnings of everything. And as part of that, as part of maintaining liberty, it's a question that has to do with values and norms and how we treat one another. Because if I want to, step on you and your rights, then I'm essentially undermining my own liberty. But a lot of people don't see it that way. So, yeah, that's to me, that's how I see it. Is the technology companies and that conversation, it's ongoing, and it's more of a long-term thing. But in the here and the now, what can we do as global citizens and as citizens of our own nations and countries to put pressure on our elected representatives and be part of that discourse?
I appreciate that because one of the things, it's very scary. It's like a snake eating its own tail, because when you talk about the morals and the values, what I find when I dialogue or come in contact with, we could say people who like Trump or ultra conservatives, that what you're saying is exactly what they believe that they're bringing back to the culture, that more value, more morality, and that, they look at all of the things that you've just pointed to, and instead of going forward, they want to go backwards. So to be able to give justification to what they're saying and what you're saying, but to respond to that in a new way, because it's, what you're speaking about is, I see as the very fuel behind Le Pen and behind Trump, and it is so complicated because of that. And how do we do that in a new way that goes forward and not backwards? Because in a way we're both calling for the same thing, but the old way is, I think we're on the program because the old way isn't working. So how to find that new way and to be able to articulate that.
I'll just respond to that quickly. Jonathan Haidt, he's a moral psychologist. He did a great dialogue with Chris Anderson, the founder of TED. Definitely look it up online. I recommend it to everyone. Jonathan Haidt and Chris Anderson. It's a TED dialogue. It's a 1 hour video, I think, 20 minutes at least. Yeah, but just look it up. It's fantastic because Jonathan Haidt, who himself, has been a liberal for many years, he now considers himself a centrist. He's talked about some of the failings on the left, and key among them is our notion of diversity, that it is starting to reach breaking point, and it's going up against some things that are quite inherent in human nature, that diversity works really well when there is consensus around what it means to be together and to have diversity to begin with. But when the majority group starts shrinking and diversity increases among other groups and their numbers, the majority group, based on his studies and everything he's looked at, starts to go into authoritarian tendencies. And this is where it becomes an interesting conversation for me, right? Because what's shocking for me after having come here to North America is the reality of race. I've always known that race is a major issue in the United States. I've read about it, I've watched it on TV, I've seen documentaries. But to actually be here in North America and to feel it viscerally, it's a totally different experience. And it's been a very rude awakening and quite a shock to my system. I realized that I was quite naive. And part of what's interesting that I see from my perspective is when we talk about this, there's immediately tension, right? Because people think in terms of black and white and, oh my God, white supremacy and white oppression and so on. I don't necessarily see it that way. I see it as the nature of power, because in Malaysia, the Malays are the majority and they tend to mistreat the Chinese minority and the Indian minority. Right, so the Malays make up about 60 to 65% of the Malaysian population. Malays are the majority; they're majority Muslim as well. And then you have Chinese who are Buddhists and Christians and atheists and agnostics and so on. You've got Indians who are Hindu and so on, and Sikh and Punjabi. And you have the same dynamics. We could call it Malay supremacy. So from my perspective, this is not like a white thing, and that's what the conversation devolves into the United States, rather than taking a step back and looking at it as a human thing. We look at China. China's doing a lot of bad stuff to its minorities, without rule of law, without any kind of accountability. Malaysia, I just talked about it. I can give you so many examples from around the world. But in the United States, it always devolves into the binary of black, white, and then of course you've got the other minorities and so on. And I just don't think that kind of languaging is very helpful moving forward. There is truth to it, but it's not the entire truth. It's partially true.
Amir, I'd like for us, and Michael, I'm sorry, I think we're going to move. Okay, thanks. We should move into breakout groups and let these folks kind of go at this, for a bit. Do we have a question that we'd suggest people to suggest that you continue with? Anything pop up? Question for the groups to discuss?
Oh, like from me?
Yeah, from you, or yeah.
Oh, okay. I mean, the main question is really, what's your profession? Where does your expertise professionally lie? What's your educational background? And then taking those into consideration, what is the role that you can play within your sphere of influence?
Yeah, given
because
all that we've been
that's
talking.
very tangible. It's very tangible and it's very hands-on. I mean, if you go to an industry conference and become someone in your industry who's talking about these issues and raising them and being the first to do so because everybody else is shying from the topic, I think that in and of itself is very helpful.
Great. Then we will go into.
Can I add another question?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
because this is one that I've been thinking about, and it's challenging for me, and I share this challenge with everyone here on this call. For us as people who are left-leaning and maybe who self-identify as liberals, and it has to do with violence. It's the question of violence. Mindfulness, spirituality, non-violence, pacifism. Okay, that was sustainable up until a certain point. But what happens with technological disruption, with information warfare, carried out by Russia, and also with dictators like Bashar al-Assad gassing his own people, using chemical weapons, killing children? What do we do in such a predicament? Keeping in mind and taking into account that one of the very real reasons the European Union is now quite dysfunctional and destabilized, one of the real reasons Brexit happened, is Syria. You can draw a straight line from Syria all the way to Brexit. The millions of refugees who poured out because there was no solution. There was no fly zone, safety zone. It's the risky endeavor. Iraq was a disaster. Millions have died. Trillions have been squandered. But have we learned the lesson from Iraq? And what happens in situations like Syria? And Syria is just one thing, and it's only the beginning of the 21st century. What's going to happen in the next 5 years? What kind of new conflicts could potentially emerge within 10 years? So the question of violence is one that I believe we really, really have to contemplate. Because if we don't discuss it, if we don't talk about it at all, then we're just simply ceding the ground to the far right, and they can come up with much more horrific solutions.
All right, I think these are two
questions.
Two questions to talk about.
In very different directions.
And as we did in previous calls, just to let you know, we will now open this up for two groups, and we leave it up to you how long you want to go with this group. So you can go for half an hour, you can go for an hour, you can go for half a day, as you wish. We keep it open, and you end it in whenever feels right.